But yeah, I ain't gonna lie, I know I'm ugly too.
You think you're ugly?
Little piece. I still get tripping. I still be on my fly man too. I know that's why they be talking about he ugly, but I still yeah, I already know. But I ain't these hoes. I got a wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wifed up.
Yeah.
Remember there was a whole Kodak thing about how he prefers light skin girls? Light skin girls are easier to control, I guess. Something like that. Are you on that?
I ain't gonna lie. What he say? I'm already black. I don't need no black.
Right, that's what he said.
Throw your hand. Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. I can't have no cut. Like, I know if I'm black, right? I'm black.
Yeah, black is beautiful though, man.
So I know if I with a black, we gonna have a black baby.
So?
I ain't with that.
Why?
Cause I'm already black.
So?
I can't. No.
Well, I mean, this is an interesting thing. You know what I mean? Like, so if you have a baby, you don't want your baby to be the same complexion as you?
Mm.
Why?
This a once in a lifetime thing.
What do you mean?
Like, this a dark shade. They be, hell nah. I can't have.
Is your mom same shade as you?
Nah.
She's
hell nah. My mom like caramel mocha.
Okay, so your dad is darker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nah, that's what? You talking about I'm black? You see that boy?
So your dad is actually darker.
Yeah.
Okay. Has your mom ever said that she doesn't want her grandkids to be?
Nah.
Okay. Because I remember I interviewed Amara La Negra. You know who that is? She's on Love and Hip Hop. I'm gonna show you.
It's sad, but it's the truth. I've heard it many, many times. And we are treated differently. A lot of Latinos don't want my kind mixed into their family because they didn't want to better the race. And better the race means more European features.
That sound like some clown shit. Ain't gonna lie, that sound like some clown.
That's some clown. Straight up.
Better the race.
But you're saying that you don't want a kid that's gonna be your complexion. But don't you want your kid to look like you though?
Do you believe skin bleaching is a form of self-hate or just a style? Please explain the reason for your answer.
It's self-hate for me because if it is that you understood the damage and the implications, you would be aware that you're damaging your skin. And I don't think anybody would consciously want to damage their skin if they like their skin. So if you look at your skin and you see something that you don't like, you're going to try and change it. So once you want to change what is there because you don't like it, it's self-hate. And it is because you were not taught that this skin is a badge of honor. It is not a badge of shame.
Who can imagine what could be the feelings of a father and mother when looking upon their infant child whipped and tortured with impunity and placed in a situation where they could afford it no protection? But we are all claimed and held as property. The father and the mother were slaves. I was compelled to stand and see my wife shamefully scourged and abused by her master. And the manner in which this was done was so violently and inhumanely committed upon the person of a female that I despair in finding decent language to describe the bloody acts of cruelty. My happiness or pleasure was then all blasted, for it was sometimes a pleasure to be with my family, even in slavery. I loved them as my wife and child. Little Frances was a pretty child. She was quiet, playfully bright, and interesting. But I could never look upon the dear child without being filled with sorrow and fearful apprehensions of being separated by slaveholders because she was a slave, regarded as property. And unfortunately for me, I am the father of a slave. It calls fresh to my mind the separation of husband and wife, stripping, tying up, and flogging, and tearing children from their parents and selling them on the auction block. It calls to mind female virtue, virtue trampled underfoot. But oh, when I remember that my daughter, my only child, is still there, destined to share the fate of all these calamities, it is too much to bear. If ever there was any act of my life while a slave that I have to lament over, it is that of being a father and a husband of slaves. Happy Monday, happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, and I am continuing my reading of Dr. Joy Degruy's great book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. And I started my reading at the very beginning of chapter 4, which is post-traumatic slave syndrome. So today we are going to learn exactly what post-traumatic slave syndrome is and how it manifests. But before I get to that, I want to do two things real quick. I want to give a shout out to my new patron on Patreon, Stephen L. Steed. Thank you, Stephen L. Steed, for becoming a new patron. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the family. And I also want to give a big thank you to Nair for this book. Nair mailed me the book about Marcus Garvey, and I am very appreciative. I'm thankful. Thank you for the book. I love it when I get books. I really, really do love books. I love reading. I love learning. And this is something I'm definitely adding to my collection. I'm going to read it. I'm going to enjoy it. And, you know, it's all love. And I appreciate Nair. And thank you. So I want to make sure I do that. So to show the people, you know, the love that's out here. So thank you. So as you can see from the first clip and the second clip, we're talking about the trauma. We're talking about the effects of post-traumatic slave syndrome. We're talking about what post-traumatic slave syndrome exactly is, how it came about, why it came about, who it came from, who was it inflicted upon, how long it was inflicted upon, what type of acts were inflicted upon specifically African people, because we're talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome and people of the African diaspora, but specifically Black people in America, right? How does this post-traumatic slave syndrome manifest itself in Black people in America today, right? How does trauma affect people today? So the trauma that we experienced that started in the 1400s, but specifically in America in the 1600s. So the trauma that started then, it lasted for 400 years, and all of the trauma after that leading up to today. How did it affect us? How does slavery affect Black Americans today? And why should slavery affect Black Americans today? These are things that we're getting into. So jumping back into page 113, trauma's effects. All right. What are the impacts of generations of slavery and oppression on the people? In order to begin to understand the magnitude of this legacy on contemporary African Americans, it is important to examine the diagnostic characteristics of trauma. What are the effects of trauma on human beings? What does trauma look like? How does the trauma manifest itself, right? If I someone, say an attendee at one of my lectures, most would agree that the victim of the shooting would be severely traumatized. A gentleman seated a few rows away from the victim might be somewhat less traumatized. Someone walking in the hall that heard the could possibly be traumatized. Some family members of the victim informed about the may be intensely traumatized, while others very little. There might even be a woman seated next to the victim who may not experience any symptoms of trauma whatsoever. This is because human beings react to events differently, right? So we know that. Laying the groundwork, right? With the destruction of the World Trade Center in New York on September 11, 2001, and I talked about this before, right? Many Americans once again became familiar with the term post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, right? Lots of citizens were reported to be suffering from the disorder as a result of witnessing the destruction of those buildings and the deaths of those trapped inside. At the same time, while most individuals who repeatedly witnessed the news coverage of the towers toppling did not seem to suffer any enduring mental or emotional damage, some did, right? People do indeed respond to traumas differently. With what is known about trauma, it is probable that significant numbers of African slaves experienced a significant amount of trauma to warrant a diagnosis of PTSD, right? Since there are no living African American slaves today, I would have to hypothesize using current diagnostic criteria. The Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, revised, describes features of disorders, reports the conditions which may give rise to them, and lists each disorder's symptoms. These all help clinicians with making accurate diagnoses, right? However, it is not necessary for an individual to show evidence of all of the listed symptoms. So you don't have to show evidence of everything to warrant being diagnosed with a specific illness. The following are a list of some of the conditions which give rise to mental and or emotional traumas that justify the diagnosis of PTSD. So we're laying this groundwork now. We're laying this groundwork. So here are some of the conditions, right? A serious threat or harm to one's life or physical integrity. A threat or harm to one's children, spouse, or close relative. Sudden destruction of one's home or community. Seeing another person injured or killed as a result of accident or physical violence. Learning about a serious threat to a relative or a close friend being kidnapped. Stressor is experienced with intense fear, terror, and helplessness. Stressor and disorder is considered to be more serious and will last longer when the stressor is of human design. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All 7 of them are examples of conditions which give rise to mental and or emotional traumas that justify the diagnoses of PTSD, right? So it is important to note that the manual states that any one of these above stressors is enough to cause PTSD. So once again, you don't have to have all of the conditions, all of the symptoms. You can display one or more. So what about African slaves? Many slaves did not experience just one of the above stressors. Rather, many experienced all of them. And the great preponderance of slaves were subjected to these traumatic experiences over and over again, right? Taking into consideration the fact that slaves brought to the Americas from Africa were exposed to a lifetime of traumas, even with the fact that not everyone is traumatized by traumatic events, anyone with limited astuteness could surmise that a considerable number of African slaves are likely to have suffered from PTSD. If you got any type of reasoning in your mind, in your brain, somewhere in there, you already know that African slaves suffered PTSD. Look at the conditions that they lived in, and we're going to go into more detail, right? Today, those who are diagnosed with PTSD exhibit symptoms that may require clinical treatment, inclusive of drug therapy, right? Some of the symptoms of PTSD include, PTSD symptoms: intense psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of an traumatic event. Physiological reactivity on exposure to internal or external cues. Marked diminished interest or participation in significant activities. Feeling of detachment or estrangement from others. Restricted range of effect. Sense of foresight in future. In other words, does not expect to have a career, marriage, or children, or normal lifespan. Difficulty falling or staying asleep. Irritability or outburst of anger, and difficulty concentrating. And what's interesting is these symptoms. So I work in HIV/AIDS prevention. So when in my city, when somebody is diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, my organization is one of the organizations where they can receive HIV care. So when we are enrolling a patient into our care system, one of the evaluations that we give them is called a PHQ-9. I don't remember exactly what the PHQ-9 stands for, but it's a mental health evaluation, basically. It's a mental health evaluation. And I bring up the PHQ-9 because the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the 9 symptoms, the 9 exhibited symptoms of PTSD that I just described are in our PHQ-9. Those are exact things that we ask in our PHQ-9 because we are assessing we're assessing the mental state of the patient. How healthy mentally is this patient that we're bringing into our care system? And if the patient does exhibit symptoms of depression or PTSD, then we can make sure that we refer that patient to the proper mental health professional to help them be able to manage the PTSD, right? So it is familiar with me because it is something that I myself have questions I've asked patients myself. So the maintenance of healthy and secure relationships. Now, this is important. That's why I highlighted this to read. The maintenance of healthy and secure relationships is among the most important values within African culture. And if Europeans have studied us, like I know they've studied us, they understand the nature of our relationships. And that is one of the reasons why our relationships are falling apart now, because white supremacy white supremacy, making sure that they attack the Black family unit or attack Black relationships, period. We have to have declining relationships within our communities, within our societies, within our families, so that we cannot build strong families, strong communities, or strong societies. So what do you think would happen if these relationships were destroyed and never allowed to fully take root again, right? If you were going to devise a uniquely cruel system of punishment, you could never have devised something more devastating and insidious than American chattel slavery, because it absolutely categorically destroyed existing relationships and undermined the people's ability to form healthy new ones.